Hey, thank you all for coming. Thanks to all the people I invited that showed up. Yay. So I guess there was a review in the LA Times today, which I was super excited about, that talked about how incredibly dark this book is. And it is, right? It's a little dark, but there's not that many murders, and some of them are suicides, so that's better. There's the thing I want to convey is that there's some funny stuff, even though it may be said by people who are just out of prison or who are heroin addicts. Okay, so I'm just going to read a little bit from the second part of the book, which is from the perspective of. Well, I don't even have to set it up, I don't think, because I think he explains everything. My mom had been dead almost a year, and my dad was losing his mind. He would hang out with this guy named Akil Ozarowski, who I guess was once his patient. They would meet up at a bar down the road called Parnell's, and they'd talk through their paranoid conversations, pints of beer and shots of Jameson whiskey, and then my dad would walk home through the suburban greenery of Cleveland Heights, carrying a six-pack of beers that he bought from CVS and a pack of Marlboro cigarettes, and the streets were utterly empty, and the trees were dripping from a thunderstorm, and he'd be stumbling along in the dark, and his feet would splash in puddles on the sidewalk, and the old houses would stare at him, their windows lightless, and he was a widower, 40-something years old, sad and wobbly and flushed and intoxicated, with a plastic bag swinging from his hand. One time he saw a deer. One time he thought he saw a bear walking down Briarwood. It's not completely improbable, he told me. There are between 70 and 90 wild black bears in the state of Ohio. Was that true? How crazy was he? Maybe a lot, I didn't know for sure. I was 18 and supposedly starting college and living home alone with him. My brother Dennis was out of the picture, a sophomore at Cornell, very, very busy, not interested in what was happening with his crazy dad and loser brother at home. I remember waking up and hearing my dad come in, and I saw his silhouette in my door, tilting back and forth a little, and he had, for some reason, decided that he needed to wake me up to inform me about a serial killer, some person murdering college boys, he said, drowning them. How 1990s, I thought. He was investigating it, he said, possibly writing a book about it, and I was like, cool. And then I rolled over and faced the wall. I've heard about that, my friend Rabbit said the next day. It's like an urban legend among college kids. Supposedly there's this serial killer who kidnaps drunken bros and then tortures them and dumps them into a river so it looks like a drowning. They call the guy Jack Daniels, which I think is hilarious. Or else some people think it might be some kind of cult initiation ritual. He had his hypodermic kit out and was cooking some heroin on a spoon with his lighter. He grinned at me. How'd your dad get into that? He's really losing his shit, isn't he? Rabbit liked the needle. He preferred it to snorting or smoking, but when he heard his mom open the door to the basement, when he heard her slow, heavy steps begin to clump down the stairs, I watched the way he sprang quickly to tuck the syringe under the cushion of the couch. He put the little baggie of heroin in his pocket and the spoon into a coffee cup. He left the bong where it was on the coffee table in front of us. Bruce? She called, which was Rabbit's actual first name. Sweetheart, I need your help. Rabbit looked at me sidelong. One of the first personal things he explained about himself was that no one called him Bruce. Whenever that name was spoken, he'd give me a warning glance. What do you want? He said now, looking hard into my eyes. Ma, I'm busy. I can't reach the cupboard above the refrigerator. With my leg like it is, I don't want to try to climb up on a chair. Ma, he said, what do you need so bad at 1 a.m? Why don't you just go to sleep? I murmured. I made some kind of weird gesture thing with my hand. Rabbit, I could help her if... But Rabbit froze me with a glare. Go to sleep, Ma, Rabbit said, which made no difference. Like in a horror movie, his mom kept plunking down the stairs, and then her body came into view. She was somewhere in her 40s, not really bad looking for her age, barefoot, sweatpants, a T-shirt that was cut off at the midriff. Okay, I'll admit it, she said. It's vodka. I put a bottle of vodka in that cabinet, and I need it. God damn it, Rabbit, I'm in pain. And actually, she probably was in pain. Rabbit's mom had cancer, ovarian cancer. How fucking fucked up is that? Rabbit said. Cancer of the vag. And his mouth twitched, very rabbit-like. And yet, even more fucked up, unspeakable, was that my own mom had died of that same cancer. To me, this was kind of the kind of coincidence that could make you suddenly think that some higher power was watching you, and not in a friendly way. This wasn't something I could say to Rabbit, of course. Rabbit knew how my mom died, obviously, but he had studiously unknown it. And it was not something that would ever appear in our conversations. I was supposed to be going to college. I hadn't gone in for the whole apply to a bunch of expensive schools and wait with bated breath to see if you get into Ivy League thing that my brother had turned into such a huge drama. Instead, I was going to live at home and take classes downtown at Cleveland State, and I'd gone so far as to register for an English and a math and a political science, though as it turned out, school had started 2 weeks ago and I had somehow not attended any of the classes yet. My dad didn't know this, of course. He doled out money for books and expenses without even blinking an eye. I guess he'd gotten some money from my mom's insurance. And honestly, the majority of our conversations involved him opening his wallet and handing me some cash. Sometimes he would pop up and attempt an amateurish performance of a dad. He would go off on some digression about how constellations aren't real, or how kale is really good for you, or how he wished we could have gone camping more often when I was little. Did I want to go camping? Or he would lay some wisdom on me, Sufi wisdom he called it, which somehow seemed completely random and impenetrable. Then he'd roam off, trailing his wisps of positivity through the house. Mostly, we avoided each other successfully. My Uncle Rusty called late at night, and usually when he called, I was extremely high. Picture me spread eagle in my underwear on my bed. I've been without language for maybe 2 hours, staring at the textures on the ceiling, which are possibly rotting leaves, or centipedes marching single file, or Cthulhus. Imagine that my phone would begin to vibrate from somewhere underneath my body, and it sent a slow tentacle of awareness through me, and at last I put my phone to my ear, and my eyes were still on that fucking insanely alive ceiling. And my Uncle Rusty said, "Hey, man." His voice was kind of scratchy and deep, and it made me think of stoners and heavy metal music from the 1980s, the intonation and inflection and so forth. First time I heard him, it occurred to me that there are certain ways of speaking, maybe even certain ways of moving your tongue and your voice box that only a particular generation of human beings learn how to do. I sometimes thought that my uncle had a way of talking that was preserved in amber from 1983, and even from the first time he spoke to me, I thought it was amazing. "Hey," I said, after a pause that seemed really overlong. I was imagining him with a beard, maybe wearing a paisley bandana. Shitty orthodontia, but not in a bad way necessarily. "Man," he said, "are you on dope again?" "Kind of," I said. "I'm shrooming." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry to hear that, young man. I thought you said you were gonna..." "I am," I said, "I am." Rabbit's mom and I smoked a little weed together, and then I drove her to the chemotherapy. The infusion room was what she called it. She told, I'm going to skip it. I started talking to my Uncle Rusty about 6 months ago. This was after he was released from prison, after most of the stuff that my dad had testified at the trial was proved to have been a lie. Also, for about a half year after my mom died. He kept his distance for a while. "I didn't want to intrude," Rusty said. "I mean, yeah, it's a lot to deal with. I wanted to give you all some space." Not that it mattered. No one would talk to him, not my dad, not my Aunt Kate. He had nobody in the world. They just put him out at the prison gates, and the government didn't make reparations for what they'd done to him. They didn't even give him apologies. Basically, he got so screwed there are no words for it. His trial had happened back during the 1980s when the idea of satanic ritual abuse got very popular. That's how he put it. The idea of satanic ritual abuse got very popular, he said. And it made me think of a crowd of eager fans rushing toward the stage as if satanic ritual abuse were a rock band. I'd never heard of that term before, satanic ritual abuse. It sounded so corny that I kind of chuckled until he explained it to me, and then I started doing some internet searches. According to the World Wide Web, satanic ritual abuse was basically an urban legend, a moral panic, according to Wikipedia, which the people of the 1980s started to believe was real. Seems like a lot of people accepted it as truth, that there were hidden satanic cults all over the country, secretly doing human sacrifices and torturing children and calling up Satan in graveyards. There was actually a news special on television exposing Satan's underground, which you can watch on YouTube. You will not believe their hair. You will not believe how simple-minded the people of the 1980s are. Looking back from the future, it's kind of embarrassing how superstitious and gullible they were back then. There was this famous reporter named Geraldo Rivera, and he says, estimates are that there are over 1 million Satanists in this country. The majority of them are linked in a highly organized, very secretive network. From small towns to large cities, they have attracted FBI attention to their satanic ritual, child abuse, child pornography, and grisly satanic murders. The odds are that this is happening in your town. And you think, okay, that's a knee slapper. But then you go on to read about how the whole country was mesmerized by this bullshit. So there were local police departments starting their own cult task forces, and there were arrests and witch trials where preschoolers testified that they had seen their teachers disemboweling infants and drinking their blood. Kids claiming they'd been forced to have orgies while hooded figures watched. Psychiatrists were swamped with people who had recovered memories of past satanic abuse that they'd repressed. You travel through a K-hole of link after link after link as the stories grow more absurd and impossible as they go along. You read that Father James LeBar, appointed chief exorcist for the Archdiocese of New York by Cardinal O'Connor, spoke of an international conference of Satanists that he claimed took place in Mexico, in which the Satanists discussed plans for world domination. It was said there was a global network of the ultra-rich who made use of flunkies from local police departments and who had minions who were school superintendents and CIA agents and congressmen, and that women and children were ritually sacrificed or forced into sex slavery, and there were bathing in blood of infants, and children were boiled alive in front of a host of Satanists, and their organs were lavishly eaten. It seems like people must have truly believed this shit because, as it happened, SRA was a big component in Uncle Rusty's trial. They brought in the fact that Rusty loved death metal and that he had drawn pentagrams on his school notebooks, and basically they made the trial about satanicness rather than the fact that they had no real evidence. My dad testified that he had seen Rusty sacrifice baby rabbits to Satan, which my Uncle Rusty admits was true. He really did kill baby rabbits with the brick in the middle of a pentagram that he had drawn on the floor of an old abandoned house. At the time, he thought it was hilarious. He loved trying to freak my dad out. It's probably not forgivable when you do shit like that, my Uncle Rusty said. And then he was silent for a long time so that I checked my phone to make sure we hadn't been disconnected. I cleared my throat. I was like 14, 15, and your dad was about 8, I guess. And he would follow me around like a puppy dog, and I just wanted to scare him maybe, to make him go away. Shit, I fucked up so bad when I was your age. I was seriously an awful person. Well, I said, he knew he had a lot of amends to make because he was abusive to my dad. And if my dad wouldn't talk to him, maybe he could pass on the amends to me. I just want to be an uncle to you, he said, like a real uncle, someone you can trust and count on. And then he told me, I'm not going to judge you because I've been in all the dark places, son. And I've tried every drug there is, and I know what it's like, bro. My mom died too. All right? See, it's not dark. No, none of those characters will die. Oh my God, Brian Pitts. Hi. I haven't seen him in 25 years. So cool. So yeah, none of them, well, some of them will die. Most of them will die. But in a funny way. I'm glad to take some questions if people have questions. I also have my former editor here, who is the editor that taught me how to write a novel. So you can blame him. So yay. Dan Svitanka. And one of my students, who's a novelist, is here. Katie DeSabato. Oberlin grad. Yeah.
Hi. I was just curious because there's so many interesting components. Which was this kernel? Like, which was the seed of the book? What idea came to you?
Yeah, I mean, it started a really long time ago when my brother-in-law told me this story about this series of drownings that was happening in the Midwest in the early 2000s, and he was going to college at University of Wisconsin, and one of his friends was drowned, and the police said it was just an accidental drowning, but he and his friends were convinced that this was the work of a serial killer, and that was the original sort of inspiration. I couldn't figure out what I was going to do with it because I knew I didn't want to set the book on a college campus. That's one thing I promise I'll never do. But it was definitely sort of moving around in the back of my mind, and then some of these other elements started to come in as well. Yeah, Katie.
What was the process for developing the voice of the teenage boy that you were writing from?
Well, I mean, I was drawing a lot on what was going on with my students. I mean, that helped. It turns out this was written when my son was about this age too, and he was pretty helpful. I actually dedicate the book to him because he was the person that read through this all the way through as I was writing it. And would definitely correct me whenever I screwed up certain things. It'd be like, Dad, no one would ever say that. Yeah.
So you come from a tradition of deeply ironic or satiric writing, and it's a difficult tone and edge to cut when you write. There's a woman in the audience right now. Her father's one of the best American writers in that vein. But who are the people that you see as predecessors, and how do you learn from? I think what you write is very difficult. I don't think every writer can write from the perspective you do. It's kind of it's like humor or something, or poetry almost. You have to have a natural indication to go that way, right? And so I'm just wondering who fed you, who nourished you?
Well, I mean, I think the writers that were most important to me when I was a kid were Ray Bradbury, yay, and Shirley Jackson meant a lot to me as a writer, and I was a big fan of sort of the Lovecraft group, and then when I got into college, I learned that I wasn't really allowed to write about that kind of stuff, and that what I really should be writing was straight up realism. And then I sort of really discovered and fell in love with people like Raymond Carver and Alice Munro and Ann Beatty, and so after a while, I was trying to write a good enough Ann Beatty imitation that I could get into the New Yorker, but I also realized that I had kind of a little bit lost what the soul of what was driving my work, which was this sort of dark stuff and the stuff that had kind of a magic element to it or a ghost element to it, and I think starting with the collection Among the Missing, I started to sort of move back in that direction and to try to write stories that had some kind of element of magic or ghosts or horror, while at the same time, also having some of the literary stuff that I liked in the writers I was being taught in college.
So I have a follow-up because you said so much that impresses me, especially with Shirley Jackson. I think the feel with her and the political times we're going through now, it almost calls for more than realism. Realism is a failure given the cultural moment I think that we're living through. A lot of writers do feel that. And so they're looking for reinvention. They're looking for new answers. And I certainly feel Shirley Jackson had similar problems, at least in gender, were facing her during the time she created this. And I think it allows the culture so much, your writing. Do you feel that you're in process, in dialogue with a culture that's troubled right now, that you're really sitting with a lot of culture makers in a position of pointing a direction?
I don't know. I mean, I don't really think about things like that very often. I mean, in terms of like being able to, I mean, I'm a novelist, so I don't really probably speak to very much of the culture. I mean, let's face it. But I mean, certainly the culture that we live in influences the way that I write and what I write about. And one of the things that, I mean, it turns out that Americans have. This is not the first time that we've been sort of obsessed with fake news, and it's not the first time that the flim flam man has come to town in America. I mean, it happens over and over. And this stuff that I was reading about the satanic ritual abuse, that is. Was completely crazy looking back on it, but it was so widely believed. And of course we have, the Russians are coming in the 1950s, and we've got, the Salem witch trials at the very beginning of our country, so that there is this, this sort of hysteria, this sense of panic, but also a kind of shared delusion that happens sort of repeatedly in our country, and that, I mean, that, to some extent, this is a more personal story, but it's definitely a story that's about delusion.
When Shirley Jackson dealt with that 60 or 70 years ago, it gave feminism a new direction today. So I think that the work you're doing is really important. When you're in that mode of reinvention, you're creating solutions. That's how I feel as a reader.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yes?
Do you think there's anything inherently unnerving or haunted about Cleveland, Ohio?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I love it there. I actually really love it there. But it is a Rust Belt city. It's a city that saw its its glory days 120 years ago, and so and there's still a lot of the of these like beautiful old mansions that are still standing, but they're covered in vines and weeds and stuff, and there are there's a kind of austerity just to the weather itself. A large, if you're looking for a cure for today's beautiful day, a large portion of this takes place in Cleveland in January. So that will, it'll just give you a different kind of mood if you're looking for one. Yeah.
You mentioned having your son read this while it was in progress, and you have an old editor here. I'd love if you could talk about who reads what when you're writing.
I mean, it kind of depends, but I need at least one sane person to help me through. Because I mean, I can really go. I mean, there was a point where this was really out of control, and I got talked out of some things that it was important that I was talked out of. But I do have a pretty a network of people that I show stuff to from a pretty early stage, and who read as I go along. And I know some people think that's a really terrible idea, or just don't like that idea, but it's very useful to me, just to keep myself grounded, and it's nice to have that, because it's there's this I guess shared fantasy that you're building with somebody, which is nice.
I love the way you read, Dan.
Oh, thank you.
It's so beautiful and I think the reason that there's so much of the humor in your characters is because they're all so incredibly human, and you like them so much, and you understand them so much, and you go so inside them. So, you look like a teenager just now.
No, thank you. I've been working for years to look like a teenager, as you can see.
But it's a kind of joy and glee in these characters, and that's so infectious when you read your work, because you really reading your work, you do end up in the shoes of whoever the character is, and they're always then so moving too. All your characters.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I love them.
Yeah.
You always have like this really audacious movement in your plots, and in this one, I noticed it's sort of like made concrete, where you have like two parts of the story happening simultaneously. Would you just talk about like how do you structure your stories? Do you think about that beforehand, or are you just going from the beginning through the end and whatever presents itself to you?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that's nice about having a genre piece is that it's a container that has a given structure, right? I mean, as a kid growing up, it was like the heyday of the serial killer thriller, and I consumed mass market paperbacks and so I mean that structure was really in my head already, and I didn't have to like map it out, which is good for me because I tend to think more in like pieces and in collage sort of form, and so I mean I wrote most of this in the kind of small chapters that I was reading, where it's like, a page long chapter or a half a page long chapter, and then I sort of began to form them together and put them together, and the first draft, as Dan probably remembers, is always a huge mess. And then the second draft, I'm able to kind of go back and figure things out. But I like to have a lot of openness for that first draft and not to know what's going to happen, and just sort of let things come out as I get to know the characters and as I get to know the plot. There was a point in when I was writing this that my son said, "Wait, Dad, you're not going to kill my character, are you?" And I was like, I wasn't planning on. Wait a minute. So, things can turn around. That's not necessarily a spoiler. Not necessarily. Yeah.
I have a quick two-part question. One is, I'm wondering if you can share a little bit of your journey in terms of creating dialogue that's both authentic and engaging. And then the other question is, in terms of getting your process onto the page, if you could touch on what kind of the structure of your day-to-day writing practice looks like. Mm-hmm.
I like writing dialogue. I don't feel like I necessarily know what's I guess I'm always thinking that dialogue should be sort of at odds in some ways with what's actually meant. So that this may be because I'm from the Midwest and nobody ever says what they really think. One of my teachers once told me that dialogue is something that people do to one another. That it's action, and that it's often. It's the same as someone doing something physical, and I think that stuck with me. The idea that it has both a sense of moving forward, but also a sense of action upon the other characters. In terms of my writing process, I have learned that if given my druthers, I will stare out the window, I will fold laundry, I will do anything but what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I really have gotten to be disciplined about it. I set a timer, and I work for half an hour, without stopping, and then I give myself a reward, and then I go back and do that as many times as I can. And I think that also adds to the the kind of the fragmentary nature of the first drafts, because I do a lot of stuff like in half-hour spurts. But that's been very helpful to me, just the whole idea of writing without stopping, because I used to be one of those writers that would write a sentence and then be like, is that the most beautiful sentence I could have written? No, I'm going to start over. And you can spend a lot of time just polishing a sentence and not get anywhere in a novel, because a novel is a lot of sentences. So that's one of the hard things about making the transition between short stories and novels, is just you can't spend as much time with that obsession with is this sentence perfect? Yeah.
So I just regarding what you were saying before about liking Lovecraft and then sort of reining it in and trying to be Ann Beatty instead.
Right.
It's really a weird thing to say.
I know.
But I'm sort of wondering, like, you always, not always, but in everything I've read so far, you take things up to this sort of tense point between what's possible before it spills over into what we think is impossible and supernatural. And it's a kind of weird tension that is very rare and very strange. And I wonder, I don't exactly know how to say it, but if you feel like you're keeping the supernatural at bay constantly, or if you seek out and feel completely comfortable in that tension now?
I feel really comfortable in that tension, and I like that ambiguity. I mean, I think there's some ambiguity in whether there's a supernatural element in this book that hasn't actually come up yet. So I'll be interested when somebody finally decides to talk about it. But yeah, it's important to me to have that tension sort of always there. I have written a few things where it actually does completely spill over, and it's a monster, it's a ghost or whatever. But most of the time, I like it to kind of be a little of both, and that may be something that I learned from people like Shirley Jackson and from Bradbury more than I learned from Lovecraft. Yes, sir.
Yeah, is there a part of writing a longer thing, like a novel, that you like the most, like redoing drafts or organizing it?
I like this the point where you are kind of immersed in a world where you, there's a certain amount of world building that happens where eventually it is this alternate universe that you can go to, and at first it's hard to build it, and then at a certain point you get so good at self-hypnotism that you can go there with like a snap trigger, and I can be with these characters. I can hang out with them if I want, and I love that immersion, that moment of being completely immersed in a world that I've created, but now is outside of me. Because once at first you're creating it, and then it becomes its own sort of thing. It exists like an organ outside of your body.
I like what she said a lot, and the only author I know, George Saunders, who really loves his characters. He just loves them.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how weird they get, or where they go, or what they do, he loves them. I think that's a really tough quality for an author to master, and especially when the fashion was to have all these unreliable, despicable people as characters, people in these books,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of troubled by it, because again, I don't think every author can write characters that are loved.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering what you think of that quality.
Well, my problem is that I love kind of unreliable, despicable people. But
They're doing the best they can.
they are. Damn it. I do think that having that it bothers me when it feels like people are making fun of their characters, or particularly when they are just using the characters as puppets and you don't feel anything for them. I don't know how to write any other way. I feel like being committed to a character and being interested in them is the only way I can be interested to write a book about them. Yeah, Alex.
So there's a kind of short story version of your brain and a novelist version of your brain, and most of the time it seems like they exist fairly well hand in hand. I'm wondering, at least for you, in terms of your own process end of it, how you feel that kind of crossbreeding between short story and novel benefits you, and also how it kind of, stumbling blocks you find along the way.
I don't know for sure. I think that's a hard question. I guess it benefits me because I think I have the ability to write something that's really tight and that can get from point A to point B pretty quickly. but I think that I tend to rely pretty heavily on this kind of fragment thing, and on sort of multiple narrators, because that has more of a feel of the short story to it. And I don't really see that as a problem, but it is sort of something that I know is a crutch for me. Cool.
What are you thinking about, or what are you ruminating on moving towards next? Like, what sort of world are people?
Well, I've got two book proposals out, and one is kind of a Western that I've had it in the back of my mind for a while, and another one is a conspiracy spy thriller set in contemporary America that hopefully will be funny. But I don't know. So anyway, those are the two things. And of course, I'm also in town pitching Ill Will as a series for Nickelodeon. So we'll see how that goes.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget that you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.